It's Mohenraj and Rosenbaum are humans. Ben and I are recording after a couple of months of not recording, and I have forgotten how to do all the recording things. So we've had a fun time figuring out my tech. My keyboard disappeared, but it's all been solved now, and this is going
Keyboard
to be
gremlins.
smooth. I still don't know where it is, but that's all right. Um,
If anyone sees Marianne's keyboard,
that's right.
please call
Please.
1-800.
That's right. Um, So today on the show, I asked Ben to interview me and Darius. Darius is usually behind the scenes doing our audio and video editing, but he is also the managing director of the SLF. And so we're in the midst of a Kickstarter, and we thought now would be a good time to talk about the Portalin project, which is the big new project. And also, so Ben can help me think out some aspects of this because it's all very much still under development, and I wanted his input, and we'd love your input too. In general, I, I'd love to hear more from the community out there as to how the SLF can be helpful to you, I guess. um, so I don't know, Ben, do you want me to do a spiel to start off? Do you have questions?
Tell me about the Portland project, Marianne.
I will tell you about
What
the
what the
Portalin
heck is
project.
this?
The heck
What's the
is it?
Portland project?
Well, so first of all, we may rename it because some people uh we I was having a little bit of a meltdown on Friday because our Kickstarter did fine on the first day, but then kind of like sank like a stone.
Hmm.
And then and I was a little frustrated because this is my fifth or sixth Kickstarter, and I was like, I feel like I have the hang of this. They've all
Yeah,
funded before, so I'm
yeah.
like, what am I doing wrong? So I asked on Facebook, and one thing people said was the name is confusing. Because this is a project about writing and literature, and no one knows the word Portalin, and they
Mm,
wouldn't know how to get from there to writing. So
mm, hmm.
the
Yeah.
reason we came up with the name was because Portolan charts were these ancient charts that
Mm,
navigators used to get from one place to another. And they actually, I think they're super cool. If you ever get a chance to see them in a library archive in the
uh-huh.
rare manuscript section, they're just really interesting. I mean, of course, they have here be dragons and all that kind of thing,
Mm,
but also they only mark the ports, so you get
hmm.
the outline of the coastline with all the ports, and then the interior is completely blank because
Yeah.
why would a navigator care, right? And
Right.
so
Right.
so it seemed like a good metaphor for writers who were trying to learn, possibly on their own or with a class, um, how to become better writers, how to get their work out there. And so it was sort of a method of charting, I guess, is what I was thinking about. And I think I was a little influenced by Ursula Le Guin's writing book, Steering the Craft,
Hmm.
which she subtitles Exercises for the Lone Navigator or the Mutinous Crew,
Hmm.
which I
Hmm.
love. So
Yeah.
anyway, we got
It
a
is
ship
it
metaphor going.
yeah, no, I like it. It's also in all over our iconography. Like there's a bunch of
Yeah.
the intro graphics, but um
But I haven't told you what it is yet.
yes, but I was going to say something about the Portland thing, which is that, I mean, just because you said like maybe change the name, is it that people saw it come up and didn't know enough to click on it, or that they were confused? Like, where was the breakdown in them not liking the name?
I think it was more that why don't we have a name that is very clear, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
it
yeah.
tells you up front what this is about. So anyway, that's something to think about. The
I
Portland
sort of
Project.
feel like looking at the page, like you might want to. I mean, that thing you just said is cool, and I almost feel like there should be like the
A
first sentence,
paragraph
like
about
at
it.
least a sentence or a couple of sentences
Yeah.
that are like Portland maps were because it's
Yeah.
cool, but like you have it there, and then it was like, is this
Right.
named after Mr. Portland?
All right,
Um,
Darius, take notes on things we should fix. So yes, no, I think that's a good one.
I always
Uh,
am.
always am. That's right. That's right. Darius is my exterior brain these days, among other things.
Darius
So,
has a plan.
um,
He is the Jeeves to your Wooster.
Yes. So thanks, Ben. For those who aren't familiar, that was not a compliment.
I mean, in a way,
in a
it was
way,
just charming.
Sure, Bertie Wooster has his own weird genius.
His own weird genius and
Yeah,
implacable charm.
that's
Yeah,
right.
they're a dynamic duo.
I wrote a Worcester Jeeves pastiche for
Oh my
Wild
gosh,
Cards, actually,
that's
which I had
amazing.
super fun with. It was great. I had a chance to sit down and read P.G. Wodehouse for a month and just immerse myself first, and it was super fun. Anyway,
My favorite choice of games title is it's a Wodehouse pastiche.
he was pretty awesome. Anyway, I did a feminist post-colonial version, so
Cool. Want to read it?
yeah. So
what is the Portolan Project?
The Portolan Project. Let me start with. I actually want to take a step back and talk about what the SLF is. So
what is the SLF? What are these three letters that you keep saying?
The Speculative Literature Foundation. I started it in grad school, and I started it because I was in a program with mainstream writers primarily. They were applying for grants and residencies, which is great. But I was seeing my genre friends, writer friends, not doing that. And for a couple of reasons. One, it just wasn't on their radar that there are all of these grants and residencies out there, some of them with some serious money attached. And then also because they sort of assumed they wouldn't get in, I think. Because there is prejudice against genre fiction in the mainstream lit world. And I think that has eroded from what it was. I think 30 years ago, it was pretty strong. And now we've had writers like Michael Chabon, Le Guin, certainly, Saunders, Kelly Link, who go back and forth. And I think have, in doing so, broken down the barriers a little. So in any case, I have a student, Clarion student, E.J. Fisher, who went to the Iowa Writers Workshop.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people were very startled, and he submitted science fiction in his application. So I think when people...
Also, wasn't Alice Kim also when the...
I'm not sure.
Anyway, I don't know.
Yeah.
Alice Kim.
So I just think that, but there's still kind of a gap. And I wanted to, back in 2004, I wanted to create some opportunities that were specifically for genre writers.
Mm-hmm.
So we made a travel grant. And I say made, that's essentially, I went and found a donor to put up $1,000 and then found a jury to read applications, and then it's free to apply. And then we gave out the grant. And then we added a bunch of other grants over the next few years, which we still give out. Older Writers Grant, Working Class Grant, Diversity Grants, etc. We added this year a Convention Support Grant, which has been great in the wake of the pandemic. And we did a bunch of other stuff back then.
Is a Convention Support Grant a support for conventions or for going to conventions?
No, it's the conventions themselves apply in order to make it more feasible to have conventions in the wake of COVID. So whether they need virtual assistance or like assistance with making a virtual con or a physical con. So it's been really interesting, kind of the range of things that they apply for. They're like, because we asked for a budget and they're like, we want to buy better tech, or we, we want PPE, we want, so it's been cool. I'm really glad we were able to do that. So
the final phase is on right now, so I'll put the
link in the we have a couple more $1,000 to give out. So check the website if you're running a con and apply. So we also did other things. We had, and I don't want to spend too much time in the past, we had the Fountain Award, which was modeled on the Pushcart Prize, which Karen Meisner ran for a few years. We had a small press co-op where we would share space at conventions and reduce the costs for, like, a Worldcon table is like $200 in the dealer's room, which is beyond the reach of a lot of small presses. But then 2007 came along. 3 years later, I had my first kid. I got busy. We ended up kind of back-burnering things for about, 15 years, except for the grants, which Mahlon Edwards is the hero of the revolution because he just kept trudging on doing all the
Mhm.
work for the grants year after year after year
Yeah.
during the interregnum, as we call it. So, so maybe I'm the only one who calls it that, but in any case, um,
We call it that now.
yeah. And then my kids got bigger, and so I started having more time, and so we started doing things again, and we started a Chicago reading series, and we started creating local chapters,
I don't
and
know if
that
it was
was
before or after the interregnum, maybe before, but there was also a mentorship program.
the pilot mentorship program, which was way back before. Yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
that was in
Yeah.
the war times, but we're thinking about bringing it back. So,
Yeah.
um, so in any case, uh, what? But then the pandemic hit, so then our lovely reading series had to go on hiatus and
Mm.
so on. So we've
Hmm.
been rethinking things, and in that time, one thing that came out was this podcast, right?
Hmm.
Which was something we could do remotely while closeted in our little homes. And the other thing is the Portland project. And my idea, I guess my frustration was coming out of seeing the cost of creative writing programs just ballooning
Yeah.
exponentially. They've really, and this is where I feel like I'm a little bit on tricky ground because, of
Hmm.
course, a lot of my friends who I went to grad school with are now teaching in or administering these
Hmm.
programs, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So I don't want them to be out of jobs. That's not what I'm
Yeah.
saying. But the
Yeah.
university administration has, I think, over the last few decades, come to see MFA programs as cash cows, right?
Hmm.
For the university, they can pull in a lot of students. There's no expectation of a job on the other end. So
Hmm.
there's sort of no
Anchor.
there's no limiter, right? They
Yeah.
can make them as big as they want to,
Hmm.
and they can hire inexpensive adjuncts to teach them. And um, yeah, and they charge a lot of money. It varies from school to school. I finished my MFA 40,000 in debt, which I was very lucky to be able to pay that off with selling Bodies in Motion to HarperCollins, but most of my compatriots could
Hmm.
not do that, right?
Yeah.
And then, uh, here in Chicago, we have the School of the Art Institute, which last I checked, I think tuition is maybe 50,000 a year.
Yeah.
And Columbia University in New York is, I think, the most expensive. Their MFA in film, I believe, is 70,000 a year. So I haven't
Hmm.
checked the numbers, so don't hold me to that, but I think it's in that range.
Sure.
Most of them are not like that. And in fact, I teach at the University of Illinois, so ours is more reasonable. It's a state school, and I would say we don't have an MFA, but we have a master's and a PhD, and I think both of those are reasonably priced for students, but it is not the norm.
Yeah.
And some of them have funding, and if you get the funding, great, you have a fellowship and it's fine. But usually only a few students in the program get that funding, and the rest of them are paying out of pocket for something and they're buying a dream. I think this is what
Hmm.
makes me most frustrated about it, is
Yeah.
that they come to this thinking this is the next step to writing the great American novel,
Yeah.
and becoming a bestseller, right?
Hmm.
And it's just not. That's like not the case for
Or
almost
extraordinarily rarely,
anyone, right?
maybe.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's like, not even 99%. It's like 99.999% of them
Yeah.
will not do that, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's not any fault of their writing per se. The publishing industry is a complex beast, and there's a lot of chance, and there's a lot of
Hmm.
who and there's a lot of right place, right time. And you can the piece you have the most control over with is like making your writing as good as it can be. And when they come to you and they say, hey, come to our MFA, that's the accredited next step in making your writing better. I think
Yeah.
that's seductive for a lot of people. I know for me, anytime I don't know what to do with my life, I want to go
Hmm.
back to school. I'm like, let me get another degree. That will
Yeah.
fix everything, right? And, that would be okay
And
if
it's
the
different than
were free.
degrees in realms that are somewhat more vocational, where it's like, well, if you got this degree, that's this
Right.
concrete difference in pay scale, or this these jobs
Well,
open up, but it doesn't
the
actually have
jobs
that
open up, right? Like, I mean,
immediate correlation.
my sisters are doctors, right? And
Yeah.
the what are they called? The doctor organization, not the AWP.
The AMA.
The AMA regulates
Hmm.
the med schools so that they only graduate as many people as there are jobs for, right?
Yeah.
And they have the whole match system. At the end of the program, you are matched into a job. Now, the job may be in some small town in a state you never planned to live in,
Yeah.
but nonetheless, a job will be there for you, right?
I mean, that's an extreme case because doctors
Yeah.
are really guild-like.
Right.
I mean, an intermediate case would be like computer programming or something
Yeah.
where nobody bothers to match you with anything. But like, probably if you get a master's in computer science, you're going to be able to make, a certain amount more when you apply to Google or whatever. So there's some upside that's calculable as opposed to the MFA, which is
so
very much a shot in the dark.
Every semester I have undergrads who take my creative writing classes. They do well. They're getting an A in the class. They're writing great stuff. And they are not sure what to do next with their lives often because they're seniors in college. And they're like, and their instinct is to go get an MFA. And I end up advising them against it almost always, right? Because what are they going to, yes, they will learn things about their writing, but they will probably take on so much debt that they will be drowning under that weight for many years to come, right? So
wouldn't it be great, Marianne, if there was some alternative?
I know.
That's my softball question for you.
That's my softball question. That was the idea. And look, there are other venues out there for learning how to write. And I think science fiction and fantasy have historically done a lot of work in that area with conventions, certainly, where if you go to the con very affordably, you can attend panels and discussions that are geared
and
towards
workshops
helping
often.
You with your craft.
A lot
of them have actual workshops that you can sign up for. And that's how I did a lot of my writing in the early days, and my learning in the early days was going to those panels and, sitting at the feet of published writers and listening, asking them questions, listening to their answers.
Also, a lot of local science. There's local science fiction organizations all over. Partly because that infrastructure has existed, starting in the 30s to produce conventions. Right. But out of that, a lot of those places also then have writers circles, local critique groups, things like that.
Do they? So that's interesting. I don't.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely. I feel like the Washington and Baltimore sort of area. There's a writers group associated with. I feel like in a lot of places, if you ask the local con running association, they will put you in touch with whoever the writers are.
So I don't think Illinois has that. Like I've been to ISFIC meetings and,
well, and it may be informal. I don't know to what extent. I'm not super informed in this world. I don't know what extent. Yeah. I just know that. My sense is about Washington and Baltimore that like there's an overlap at least in the people. You know what I mean? So somebody there is going to know. And there are ways in. There's also online things. But science fiction has this we've talked about this a lot before. This sort of collegial. Because it was outside of the academy and it wasn't formalized and professionalized, and for a long time it's kind of a blue collar literature of like nobody is officially has any endowed status. You're just sending the stuff out and getting cents per word, and then it has this very pay it forward ethos of people helping each other out.
Right. So there is some pushback too, I think, from genre writers who kind of look down on the MFAs and sort of like, why we don't need no stinking accreditation, and people actually read our stuff and give us money for it, right? So there's that tension.
Well, and also it's sort of a different game. Like in a way, if you're, the question is how, are you doing this as a hobby or are you monetizing it? And if you're monetizing it, academia is like an entire other track. So people whose plan is to sell words to venues that will publish them in sufficient quantity to live on or directly to readers nowadays are like not playing the same game. That they're like, why would I want to submit to somewhere that pays in copies? But if the point is that you're supposed to accumulate enough prestige to go through the golden doorway and have tenure, then that's a different, that's in some sense a different game.
That was probably viable in literary fiction a couple decades ago. I don't know that it still is, right? I feel like they are graduating and have been for decades too many people who cannot possibly all get teaching jobs, right? And certainly even if tenure had not been destroyed, the numbers just don't don't add up. I mean, I
Sure.
will also say the numbers don't add up on the commercial side either, in terms
Uh-huh.
of, I'm reminded of Susie McKee-Charnas, who was teaching at my Clarion and told us, they asked me to talk to you about the financial realities of this job.
Yeah.
And my husband and I made a deal that he would support me until I was making enough for my writing to support him. 20 years and 20 published books later, he is still supporting me.
Right.
So,
Right.
so
And
there's,
our scare talk at Clarion was from, I mean, I don't know who it was. I think maybe the person assigned to explain to us the realities of the situation was possibly Brad Denton. But I remember them telling us particularly about short stories, about Howard Waldrop, who the famously, you can live on. I mean, and I may be getting this wrong, but the mythic tale about Howard Waldrop was basically something like you can live on writing short stories as long as you live in an unheated cabin and subsist on roadkill. Basically, if you're like really good at fishing and collecting roadkill and being on the state roadkill registry, and you build a shack with your bare hands, then you could live on.
Well, and Howard Waldrop is like a brilliant literary writer.
Yeah, like if you're the best, short story writer, revered by all other short story writers, and you live on roadkill, then maybe.
Then you can make it as just living on your writing. In our Clarion,
on short stories.
Yeah, we had Lucius Shepard, which I thought was fascinating because he made his living at the time, at any rate, but I think for many years on options that got sold to Hollywood that never got made into movies. So decades of that, right? So,
there's this story. I read this interview once with John Varley, who had basically had a like this sort of lost decade. He was sort of like famous, well-regarded science fiction writer, innovative science fiction writer in the 70s, early 80s, and then they made Millennium into a terrible movie with Cheryl Ladd and Chris Christopherson, and he went out to Hollywood to work on the script, and then there was 10 years where he had a pool and a big house and was writing all the time, but not a single word of it ever got to the screen. No one ever saw it. Was just super lucrative and super soul destroying, according to his account. He eventually gave it all up and went back to writing for the genre stuff because he just couldn't take it anymore. And that, I thought that was an interesting
So the arts are always a gamble, and we're not here to promise you that you're going to make money if you follow our path, right? That's not the goal. We're not going to put you $100,000 in debt, which I feel is a good starting point, right?
Sure.
So the idea
is... and perhaps we should get a little context because we've talked a lot about what we're not doing. So what is the Portolan Project?
So here's my positive. Yeah, so here's my positive model is Khan Academy. So I love Khan Academy. I think they do free math education, available online, available globally. It's amazing. I live in a fairly affluent suburb with really good public schools, and nonetheless, kids struggle. And the number of people I hear from, my kid was having trouble with basic algebra, but then we spent some weekends working through Khan Academy lessons, and we, that fixed it, and so that's just, it's a tremendous resource. And at one point I was thinking about applying to Google for a grant for the SLF, and they asked about scalability, and they said they really prefer to fund things with real scalability. And a lot of what we were doing, such as a local reading series, not scalable, right?
Yeah.
And so that started me thinking about what can we do where we create something that can be used by a lot of people.
Yeah.
So
the Portolan Project involves, much like Khan Academy,
well, free. it's meant to be free creative writing and lit education, right?
Yeah.
But and I think it's going to take a lot of different forms. So my grand scheme is massive. It involves things like translation. It involves things like literacy work at all age levels. It involves things like gamification of some of this. I have all these ideas, but the piece that we started out with is the part that comes most naturally to me, which is, based on my own teaching. I teach a course of writers of color in science fiction. I've taught many lit classes at the college level over the years. And I thought it would be great to make it easier for people to access this material. And we had already been doing these interviews and the podcast where we were talking to people, but the interviews are long. I mean, this is one of the big things we said about the podcast initially, is that Ben and I will talk forever, right? And
very rambly podcast, in case you listeners haven't figured that out yet.
So it seemed like bite size would be better, and especially I think the pandemic really shaped this for me, because teaching during the pandemic, we took all our classes online, right? And a lot of us had not done much in the way of online education before. So the university tried to give us some scaffolding and some resources. I read a book, I think it's called Small Teaching Online. I will look for it and make sure Darius gets notes, because it was a great book about how to do this well and very accessible and bite-sized. And that's a lot of what they talk about is making things bite-sized and accessible. You know, when you're in the classroom, you have the energy of the people, right? Which for an introvert may be kind of exhausting, but I think nonetheless, there's something there for almost everyone to having real-time in-person interaction that helps get people through the course. The first time,
because there's a lot of back channel, you know, you're noticing, I mean, you're a mammal, so you're noticing people notice you, and even beyond the talking, there's all of this, like, we're here in a herd together, little communications that are happening back and forth.
And I think there's one of the truisms about teaching is the most effective thing for any student is knowing, this is for kids, but is knowing that there's an adult who cares about how they do in the class, right? The biggest predictor of whether they're going to do well or not. And so often for a lot of kids, the only person who cares is the teacher, unfortunately, right? And they're coming from rough backgrounds and so on. So when you're online, it's just much harder to perceive that the teacher cares, right? There's especially if they're teaching, like,
brief parentheses about that. I suspect with a lot of kids, it's cares in a relaxed way, I bet, is what matters. Because I actually think that to some extent, like, your adult being super, super stressed about, you know, whether you're going to fail is probably not very helpful.
I think you might have to do another study to break it out further. So,
yes, but anyway, right? An adult who seems to know what they're doing and is rooting for you is crucial.
I actually don't even think it knows what it's doing. Right? I actually think, like, if the school janitor gives you a smile and a thumbs up on the way in, that's gonna be motivating for a lot of kids, right? You know, so I think
the school janitor probably knows what they're doing. But anyway, yes,
but he's not teaching your class, right? In the sense, it's just knowing that someone cares. So, as opposed to indifference, right? I think. If everyone around you is indifferent to your success, then it's harder to maintain your motivation, right? If people are actively working against it. You know, I had students at Roosevelt University when I was teaching there. 70% of our students were the first in their families to go to college, and I had students who had to argue with their parents that college was worthwhile. They should, as opposed to just starting working right away. The family needs the money, etc. Right? And they had to kind of fight with their families to be able to go. So it's tough. Anyway, coming back to online, many challenges. I'm sure anyone listening to this has seen what's happened with online education during the pandemic. Teachers pivoted. I still think pivot is the word of 2021. We pivoted to these online modalities. We learned how to do it. Then we learned how to do it better over time. But we were also traumatized and burnt out, and a lot of us didn't do a great job with it. So it's been a process. One of the things we've learned is that if you assign students a 60-minute video to watch, you can track and see on Blackboard at what point they stop watching. And they stop watching pretty early into the video, right? So, if you really need them to watch the video, there are some tech tools that can help, where you can say, like, you can set it up to intercut quizzes and things every 15 minutes or something, so they have to pause. And just like the training videos that they make us do for work, right? That there are ways to sort of try enforcing.
But clearly, smaller is better. Is a better way to go.
It's really, so that's
digestible,
so anyways.
And also it seems like navigable would be important. Like in a way, it's like,
Yeah.
well, what do I need to watch next? That seems like that would be an
Well,
important problem.
and so that's going to be interesting. We're not quite at that point yet. So what we've done so far is we took these interviews that we did, and I asked some grad students, Summer Van Houten and Paul Garner, I think have been mostly the ones working on this. Summer's not a grad student anymore, but she did a master's in English Lit,
Mhm.
and to go in and pull out an interesting video clip, say, I did an interview with Nalo Hopkinson talking about the use of the vernacular in writing, and pull out, a 3-minute clip, and then come up with some study guide questions and some writing exercises.
Yeah.
So right now it's very much, and we made 10 of them. So there's no structure to it yet, aside from that. Like these are the people we happen to interview, right? The Kickstarter we're running right now is I think a good next step. We pay $150 honorarium to a teacher for doing that work of creating the module, which I think is important, that we could get people to volunteer it, but I think teaching should be paid. And I don't want to, there's already kind of a general problem with universities trying to steal teachers' online content, really, intellectual property. And so we definitely want to draw a firm line in the sand that we are not going to be doing that. So you put in the intellectual work to create this material, you get paid for it. So we're trying to raise $13,500 to make 90 modules. And the reason and maybe that was too big a goal, I'm not sure, but the reason I was aiming for it is I feel like with 100 modules, I then have enough material that we can start organizing it into essentially courses, right? Here is a world building sequence that you can work through. And until we have the material, we can't organize it yet, right? I would love us to have, here's a sequence on ecological science fiction, right? From around the world, right? And this is, if you're interested in the climate crisis and you want to know what writers have been working on here and you want to start working in that area too, here's a primer, here's a sequence. And then in addition to that, I'm hoping we can have some recommended reading lists that come up so that people don't have to reinvent the wheel. I often have students who say things like, well, I had a student last week I'm really interested in generationships and, what should I read? And I'm like, well, you have to read Molly Gloss's The Dazzle of Day, right? He probably would not have run across it otherwise, right? And so not having to rely on having a professor who knows the material, but letting the SLF be this central hub is I think I hope going to be super helpful. Okay, I've been talking for a really long time now. I wonder whether, Darius, I don't know whether you want to chime in with, from your point of view. So Darius is a former student of mine, creative writing student. So in some ways he's some of the target audience for this. And
Patient zero.
Yeah, patient zero. Oh, God. What's your take on all of this, I guess?
So I think what's really helpful to me is seeing all the discussion questions and the kind of the writing questions that come out of the modules. And I think that's one thing I really loved about college and taking courses in writing and writing workshops is just the discussions that come out of writing, I guess. And
do you feel like one concern I have is that people won't be motivated to do this on their own, but at the same time, but I'm feeling like if you have a local writing workshop, this is also something that you could do, with the workshop. You could just sort of decide hey, this week, we'll do our critique per usual, but also let's put aside 20 minutes. We'll all look at these videos and questions in advance, and then we'll do some of the discussion questions, or we'll do an exercise together. I don't know.
I think the modules so far are really useful for groups, like classes, perhaps, and maybe we should try to find ways to cater to more of an individual level. So maybe more writing prompts and stuff like that. But what I've seen so far and the modules I've tried out so far are pretty conducive to like just getting you to think about, your own writing and your own world building and, how you approach that. And I think I was checking out the George R. R. Martin module and the Bacigalupi one. And
yeah, I think
You mentioned Ursula K. Le Guin steering the craft, and I remember when I decided I was going to start to take writing seriously after, when I was 27 after my break, I remember working through it chapter by chapter, and I can imagine somebody really. But how do you feel like it's easy at this point for somebody to arrive at the site and work their way through?
I
a sequence?
So. Well, we don't have a sequence yet.
Yeah,
right now, you can just try them. Basically, there aren't any recommended sequences. I would like to, I'd like to set up something like an intro writing course, right?
Yeah,
Where you have, here's the craft sequence, here's the modules, but we'd have multiple modules. And I think what's kind of nice about that is, let's say you want to do a module on plotting. Maybe you have Nora Jemison talking about plotting, and you have Aliette de Bodard, and you have, it would be great to then be able to pick, like, oh, I want to know what this person has to say about plotting, right? And be able to dive in. There was these two anthologies, Those Who Can, and I'm forgetting the name of the other one, that came out of, which comes from the saying, those who can do and those who can't teach, right? I wish I could remember the name of the other one. They came out of Clarion, and they were great. The model they used was that you had the Clarion instructors would give you a story, and then follow that story with an essay on an aspect of craft in the story, right? So I remember Nancy Kress had a story that I think was called something like One Damn Thing After Another, and about plotting, and then had a really strong essay following that kind of explicated it. And it was a really interesting model. It worked really well. I guess I feel like, there are a lot of writing books out there, and I'm sure we're going to end up making a list and recommending some of our favorites. I certainly recommend Steering the Craft. I also like the ones that are not so concretely craft focused, but are more inspirational, like Bird by Bird or Stephen King's On Writing, both of which I love and my students tend to love.
Delaney's about writing too.
Yes, if you want to get a little more into the
more theory.
Delaney's a little dense, but yes, eventually Delaney, or maybe immediately Delaney. I think
if that's your jam.
If that's your jam, right? I think the one question I have is, how well does online learning like this work for people who are not autodidacts, right? I think you and I, to some extent, are very comfortable going off and learning things, right? I do it with craft stuff all the time, right? I'm like, oh, I want to know how to do, wood burning. I will now, and because of YouTube, it's gotten much easier. You used to have to buy books. Now, YouTube tutorials, you can watch them, and someone will hold your hand essentially through the process, and it's become very effective. And I feel like people generally are becoming much more comfortable with that. But I do still meet a lot of people who are like, oh, I always wanted to learn how to knit, but they feel like they need to take a class in order to do that.
Sure.
Darius, you look like you want to add something.
Yeah, I'll say for me personally, I think what's come out of this is like the podcast. Like I really enjoy just listening to people like just talk, like converse about these things, about writing, about topics in writing and like the craft of it. And I've tried listening to podcasts where like they take a more like academic approach to it, I guess, where it's more about the teaching of it, but it's just, I don't know, it's not as engaging to me. So like one thing I'm looking forward to is just more conversations coming out of, the Portland Project with more writers, and just like more of like I guess stuff like, podcasts. And
well, and that reminds me that, when you go to conventions, and in fact, in the George R. R. Martin interview that we did, he talks about the importance of going to conventions. It's only I think the whole interview is only like 20 or 30 minutes. But a fair bit of it at the end, he's focused on that. And it's because there are the workshops you can sign up for, there's the panels you can attend. But as you go further in your career, the real value, I think, is BarCon, which is the writers tend to go hang out at the bar, and you don't have to drink. It doesn't have to be an alcohol.
Sometimes it's HallCon too, or LobbyCon,
yeah,
or whatever.
HallCon, LobbyCon, but I think it's important to say you don't have to. I think maybe back in the day it was a heavy drinking scene, and I think it is much less so now. I think these days it is people just hanging out.
Varies from crowd to crowd and con to con, but yeah.
Yeah, and you can totally nurse something non-alcoholic or eat fries or whatever and hang out, and you learn so much in those conversations, right? There'll be people at different levels of professionalism, of experience, of age, and who have seen a lot, and just I don't know, I get so much value out of that. It's one thing that I've missed tremendously during the pandemic. I went to a panel, a Zoom panel a couple nights ago, run by SCBWI, the Society for Children's Book Writing and Illustrating, about writing middle grade, because I have this middle grade novel that I wrote a scene of so far. One scene, 60,000 words to go. But I was sort of thinking of going back to it, and I went to this panel, and there was a lot of useful material in the panel, and she had us do some exercises and so on. But at the end of it, I was asking about conventions, and children's book writing doesn't really have that same kind of convention thing that we have.
I think there have been. I've seen Scubwee cons or whatever.
Well, so that's the thing. There are the official things by SCBWI. So they have chapter events and so on, right? But beyond that, there isn't LitCon that is
right. It's not like a self-organized thing like there's.
Yes. So I think it's just interesting because it's such a thing that I rely on, and and people were saying oh, you just come to the chapter meetings and so on. You'll make connections and you'll meet people and you'll hear about agents and so on, which is true, right? So I will try to do that. But if you can't, I think there's often so much cost associated with that. It's just not, the in-person convention experience is not accessible for a lot of people, right? Because travel costs, time away from work, you have small children, you have elder care responsibilities, whatever it is, there are a lot of writers who just can't access all of that knowledge through conventions. And so we have the podcast. We're also starting a Discord. And it's funny, my experienced writer friends were sort of like, oh no, another forum, why would I want to go hang out in yet another forum? But maybe it's not for them. I feel like for my students, they finish college and they want to keep writing, and they have no idea how to find community. And there are online things out there already, right? There's critters and so on, and I point them to the things that are there. But I don't know. I think there's
but you're another use case. So one thing you talked about is sort of I'm just getting started. Here is a course, or here is a sequence, or whatever. But it seems like the nice thing about, again, talking about bite size and navigable, and also what Darius said, which is it's instruction is one thing, but a lot of times what you actually get from more. I like the fact that you start out with these long interviews and you're taking out chunks that are particularly vivid and illustrative of something, which means they have all this energy, and it's also a conversation. It's not just somebody lecturing. And so there's a way in which, maybe inspiration is just as important as instruction. And I can actually imagine that a use case for this is not just I am starting at square one and I want to work my way through an entire thing, but more I am stuck, right? I just I'm maybe I am not a beginner, but I am in the middle of this thing I'm writing, and I'm not really a romance guy, but I realize that this is turning into a romance, so what's the, or generationships or whatever, so that kind of use case of I just want to get unstuck about this one thing seems like it would lend itself well to this
right
navigable space of lots of different
I mean, I would
things.
love to interview Jane Yolen right now,
Hmm.
specifically so that I
Right,
can talk to her about middle grade, right?
right, right.
And Tamora Pierce, and like I have my own wish list
You
of
just
like I
take advantage of the fact that you're like
oh
me,
I'm going to
pathologically eclectic. So you're going to run
yes,
into every possible problem in every possible genre since you
that's
can't
right.
focus on one thing, and therefore you'll just interview whoever
Right.
get will get you unstuck, and then that'll all go in the archive, and then
And hopefully it'll be
unstick
helpful to other
everyone.
people. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know. I think so. I think it's so one thing that here's a question I have. Two of the people who commented on my Facebook feed kind of commented from the point of view of user experience, right? And
Hmm.
they were one of them said like, well, the first thing you should do is go out and survey people and find out what
Hmm.
they need and what
Yeah.
they're looking for, et cetera, so on, right? And
Yeah.
then use that to determine what you do.
Hmm.
And we did a little bit of that. We actually did do a survey on Facebook at one point, and one of the things that writers said they wanted more than anything else was in-person connection.
Hmm.
And so we started thinking about local chapters, then the pandemic, but we're going to
Yeah.
come back to that. And I do think having an online forum, if people join the SLF, get access to the Discord, start hanging out in the writer channels, there will naturally be some, like, oh, we're all in Chicago, let's get together. In
Hmm.
fact, like for
Sure.
the SCBWI meeting, even it was a local meeting, but it turns out that one of the people lives up the street from me,
Hmm.
so hyper local, and we're going to get together for coffee in the next week, so
Hmm.
I'm hoping that we can facilitate in-person connections through that. But I guess my approach is it is rare that when I do things like start a magazine that someone has come to me and said, we really need
Hmm.
a magazine, right? It is right. Like that's not what
Right.
happens. What
It's not what
happens
happens.
is that
Yes.
I'm looking around and I see a lack. I see a
Yeah. Yeah.
hole in the
Sure.
field. And that's what gives me my energy is like
Yeah.
fixing the structural
Sure.
hole.
Sure.
Um,
And to some extent, you're scratching your own itch. You're like, this is the thing that
yeah,
I'm feeling the lack of.
right. And then also, so hope I'm correct that this, Strange
Hmm.
Horizons filled a hole. I think it did,
Hmm.
but there is this early stage where I'm kind of asking people to trust me, like to
Yeah.
bet on the thing.
Sure.
And I think part of that is me talking about the thing in a way that people see what I see,
Hmm.
hopefully, and
Sure.
agree that this is a worthwhile thing. So that's the bit we're at now
Yeah,
where I'm
but and
trying to
then also
articulate
things
it.
evolve. So in a way, I mean, I
Hmm.
think a lot of successful, but there is this. I'm certainly familiar, like from out of software, with this wisdom of the like, well, we survey the users and we build profiles and we figure out. And I think that can, um, for that kind of thing, for the implementation of something, it can avoid a lot of wasted time where you're speculating
Hmm.
about things that you could just go find out about. Um, at the same time, I think, and this is not just true in creative pursuits, but particularly in creative pursuits, but also for something like, I don't know, some open source tool, like somebody has to have some passion to like get a that's defining about what space you're in. So I think in a
Right.
way, often the recipe is that somebody has some passion that like gets them into some general thing and organizes momentum and energy around like we want this tool or this experience, and then there's a refinement phase. You know what I mean? And then
Right.
once it's
Yeah.
out there, you're sort of finding out like, well, we made a thing, but we have this vague, messy
Right.
idea of it. And then we're like, oh, I see. That actually would be slightly better. And the more people you bring into it and they bring their own ideas, it stops being, it's actually
Right.
useful for it to be somebody's baby at the beginning and then for
Right.
it to stop being somebody's baby,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's
So,
exactly right. Well, and because I think if it is somebody's pet project, baby, whatever you want to think about it, it opens up the possibility for transformation in a
mhm,
way that if you just go and talk to people about what's missing,
yeah,
I think we're all swimming in the sea of what we know, and it can be
yeah,
really hard to see other possibilities,
sure,
right?
sure.
And
You want to
so,
have some vision that's outside of, yeah, you don't want to just,
yeah.
well, and actually, in the defense of what those people may have been saying, in that sort of human-centered design approach where
Hmm.
you go out, you don't actually ask people what they think they want because they
Hmm.
will just tell you some slightly less painful variation on the crap they're
Right.
already using. You
Yeah.
actually watch what they do much more
Hmm.
than listen to their idea about what they do. In a way, you sort of like say, and you ask them, what do you do now? What's that
Right.
like for you? Which is very different than saying, what do you want? Like, what do you want,
Yeah.
Microsoft Word to do is like, well, I'd like it to have, a menu over here. You know what I mean? That's just tinkering. But if you're like, why would you ever write anything? And when you do, what are you trying to do? And like, how long are you able to focus
Yeah.
until something distracts you? And like, a much sort of deeper and broader sense of like, what is their experience of the world? And then that's the data on which you can build like your vision of something. But yeah, I mean, you don't want to just be running around chasing whatever they think the slight fix for their current. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I mean, at least not at that stage.
It
where
just
you're
can be.
trying to do
It can
something
be. It can be limiting.
the initial
Yeah.
thing.
So
Yeah.
in that
Yeah.
initial phase, and so okay. So that was one concern. And I do think that my other concern is, sometimes I'm not sure we're starting with necessarily the right piece of it. There are other things we could be working on that maybe are more immediate demands, but this is the piece I know. Like, this is the piece I can shepherd because it's coming out of 20, 30 years of academic work, having a foot in both literary and genre worlds, being a writer, being a teacher, etc. And so I feel like I'm on very solid ground putting together, these deep dives, we're calling them, and the larger courses. Charts. I don't know. I'm gonna got to come up with a name for that navigation route, something. But and I think the other pieces of what I'd love to have this evolve into, like I would love to have, some of these be geared towards middle grade, so that middle grade teachers who would be able to say, like, here's the sequence that I'd like to use in my classroom, get approval for it, and be able to then do a diverse set of authors on, writing fiction around ecological issues in a science class. I mean, that would be amazing, right? And I think it would be really inspiring to the kids if they had superheroes and whatever else as part of that, right? Superheroes and magic in science class. I think that'd be awesome. I don't know if science teachers agree with me, but I think it would be awesome. And so, but like that piece of it, I'm going to need to bring in middle grade people for it, right? Like teachers who know the constraints of that level, right? And for the literacy piece, I would love to see people using some of this material to teach ESL or to, teach preschoolers how to read, and instead of Dick and Jane, it's Sunil finds a magic wand, and I think that could be amazing. But that again is like someone else is going to have to shepherd the literacy piece, because I don't know anything about teaching literacy, really, right? That's got to be someone else's project. So I don't know, Ben. I feel like if I do the parts I know and the parts that are fun for me, and then the rest, like, hopefully people will show up wanting to work on the other pieces.
I think that's generally the recipe. And also, you don't need to know everything. I mean, you're full of ideas, but you don't need to know everything a million years in advance, right? I mean, like, in a way, it's like you create these things and then you get, and often it's like you want to see how things are used. Like, in some sense, there's throw things out there, and then, like, the street finds its own uses for things. And you may then pivot. I mean, if you put these things out there and it's useful to have some kind of feedback where you can figure out who's using it and see what's. And it does seem like solving the problem of, like, not everyone's an autodidact. I mean, there's a couple of solutions to that. One is that it would not be a failure if, and actually the main, you might discover to your surprise that a lot of what you're doing is just easing the burden on a bunch of MFA adjunct faculty. And,
I actually have already,
quality,
I've already used these in my own classroom on days when, for whatever reason, my lesson didn't come together. I'm like, all right, so guys.
If nothing else, you're like giving a whole bunch of content for people to make use of. That also doesn't hurt, and then they are already in a context where they're getting supported and whatever. And also, but it would also be cool to have some kind of flow where somebody shows up, they say, I want to learn this, and then they are given a sequence of stuff, but B, also connected with a bunch of people. Like, have you just finished your, like, here, listen to Nalo talk about this. Now here's a writing prompt, go do the exercise. Now click here to be dumped into the Discord channel of people who've just finished that thing, and you can read each other's stuff, right?
That's really interesting. Yeah.
Right? Like
Darius,
in a sense,
make a note.
it's like next Thursday we'll be having the latest batch of people who just did this exercise share with each other and talk about their exercise. Like that actually doesn't even require really any tech. You could simply occasionally update that page that's got the exercise on it with like, hey, on this day on this channel in our Discord, there's going to be a talk about this. Post your piece on Tuesday, and try to read everybody's pieces. We'll talk about it on Friday. You know what I mean? Like,
no, I love that. That would be. I mean, I feel like
we have self-organizing.
We have the Discord. We have a newsletter that goes out too that we're planning on putting more writing prompts in, and I think that would be a great thing to do. Like we could kind of make a schedule and be like, hey, this month we're working on this piece, and
right. Everybody who's interested, come gather.
Darius, you want to say?
Yeah, that's one thing I was thinking about actually when I was doing the George R. R. Martin module for myself. I was like, I was finding the questions and discussion like engaging, but I was just doing it myself. So it would have been nice to just talk about it with a group. So that's one thing I'm hoping for at the SLF and Portland project, is that we can build a community around that and get people talking.
I think Emmanuel Henderson is another former student of mine who is going to be running our Discord. And Darius, I think you should talk to him about this in particular and what that would look like. I think that's a great idea.
And you could do it. You could just, as I like the idea of what you said about featured. You could have a couple of them that are like there's all of them are there. But like the featured one this month is this, and if you want to discuss these discussion questions, we're over in this Discord. We're having a voice chat on, like a video call then and then, whoever shows up. And then this other one, here's the writing prompt. And if you submit your thing to the channel by then, like we'll all critique each other's stuff at this and this time.
You could first be like, we're doing co-writing sessions at this time and this time and this time,
right? And then we'll share
share afterwards in the Discord channel. I love that. I think that's super. We'll have to put in
let people self-organize.
We do have to put in some constraints about like appropriateness of what gets shared to the Discord, but
that's true too. And also like people will
probably
have concerns about like, and new writers often have concerns about like, will everyone pirate my work or whatever. So,
yes, we'll have to
probably some boilerplate, but and maybe monitor. I mean, online community is always a good monitor trolls and whatnot. But
we are planning to moderate strongly.
But nonetheless,
Emmanuel, our other. Who we've been talking about, he's pretty much built out the Discord, and he's got rules, and we're pretty much ready to go. We just need that that spark. So
to start inviting people in. Well, my students from this semester are dying to join, so
that stuff tends to scale in the sense that it's like once you have, if you have more people, you need more moderators, but like it doesn't like just because you're handling a new topic doesn't mean it changes the moderation any. You know what I mean? So like you can have one every week, and like the kicking out trolls doesn't change, so that's
yes. I think a lot of that too is established. My experience, and I could be just lucky, is that for the most part, if you have strong moderation and you can establish the culture of the community,
then it's self-selecting.
It's self-selecting and self-reinforcing. People will start saying, "We don't do that here,"
right.
And so yes, I'm hopeful that we can make
you essentially want to have a slope where people who might be tempted, who there's a bunch of people who might exhibit either pro-social or anti-social behavior depending on the local incentives, and you want to and there's a positive feedback loop where if you drag the majority of them towards pro-social behaviors, they will reinforce and police each other.
Yeah.
And then people who are just like really there to troll, you just want to be a hard enough target that it's easier to go troll somewhere else. You know what I mean? Like, you want to be more hassle than that's a little bit. That's a little bit if I don't have to run faster than the bear, I just have to run faster than you.
I'm going to tell you a funny moderation story, which is, so I run my local garden group in Oak Park, Illinois, which has about, I want to say 5,000 Facebook people at the moment. Yeah. And which is pretty good. We're a town of 50,000, so we got a lot of gardeners here. Yeah. Although we also welcome people from surrounding neighborhoods.
Well, it is called Oak Park. If it were called concrete
in any
wasteland,
case,
maybe fewer gardeners. I don't know.
But I would say that I have only, we get the occasional spammers and so on that, duck cleaning gets advertised a lot. And so those are easy to block. And we have a team of
Sure.
moderators that takes care of that. I have only had to step in a couple times, twice. Once was around the Chinese seeds thing that was happening, which I'm not going to go into it, but there was a thing and it could potentially have gotten kind of racist, and so we shut it down hard. And a couple people got mad, and we were like, you can go be mad, but this is the rule. So, and then be mad somewhere else. And then, but the funny one was about mowing the lawn, in fact, and dandelions, where someone posted a very ranty little thing about neighbors who don't dig out all their dandelions and have
there are
a
bunch
messy
of
lawn.
Dandelion lovers who came in defense of the dandelions.
Well, essentially, it was super interesting because we are generally kind of a club that is, pro pollinator, et cetera. There's a lot of people who will make that argument, but I stepped in because it was a guy, and his framing of it was like, this is messy, and you should be maintaining a neat lawn, you slob. And people got very upset and hurt about this, right? And that was where I had to come in and be like, okay, America has this whole thing about lawns. It is a cultural marker. It's a class marker. It's a gender thing about men maintaining a lawn.
Riding the
people
mower.
Get obsessive about it, et cetera, so on. You may not understand that when you posted this, you were insulting your neighbors, and it was like walking into their house and saying, God, it's a pit. Do you never sweep around here? But that's what you just did. And he was like, oh, okay. Right? But it had not occurred to him. Right. And so anyway, it was a very funny moderation moment because I thought it was hilarious. But there was a big thread, and there was a lot of upset, and it was in a couple of years and 5,000 people, this was the one big fight in the garden club was about dandelions.
Yeah, and it's always interesting what people will get, what thing will particularly set that off, and often it is on that kind of fault line. There's as you say, obvious spammers who are buy my thing, or obvious trolls who are can I get a rise out of anyone here? Is a simpler case, but more interesting in a way are where there really are values are in flux, or people are coming from different perspectives, and for some people it's perfectly obvious that everyone needs to have a neat lawn, and for other people that's those are them fighting words.
Yes.
Well, anyway, that's our little digression on moderation. Maybe at some point we'll have some super moderator on and discuss this in detail, but internet culture.
So I guess things that I'm
what
getting
else do
out
we
of
need
this,
to cover
well,
here?
Well, I want to say, you're making me realize we just have the modules there. We should have a feedback thing at the end of each module. Darius, can you drop Summer a note and just ask her to add something like that? And they're going to probably have to come to her, so she has to figure out what's manageable for her in that. But something like, I don't know, something simple, radio buttons or something, so people can just kind of on a scale of 1 to 10, how helpful was this to you? That kind of thing. And then, but also with the opportunity for them to give written feedback if they want to, in addition to the 3 simple click questions or something. And then, and that'll help a lot as we develop the modules. And also just if people can say, what's a priority for you in terms of who we interview and who we I think having a running wish list of who we'd really like to talk to. We could even make that live on the site potentially.
You could also make that a Discord channel. Again, you could just have say recommendations or discussions of past guests or whatever. You could drop people into.
Who would you be really excited to talk to? And it's going to be a balancing act. From my point of view, I want the new exciting people. I want the marginalized people who are not being surfaced by traditional publishing in this capitalist system. So we're going to be curating somewhat heavily towards diversity. But I also want the very experienced excerpts who, to be very blunt, some of the most famous people in our field have passed away in the last few years. We've lost a lot of our kind of original giants.
We want to get them before they go.
Essentially, we didn't get a chance to interview Octavia Butler, and that breaks my heart, right? Or Le Guin, right? So yeah.
Sure.
We got to get a Delaney interview in here, stat. So I hope we have him for another 30 years, but let's get going on that. So so yeah, I don't know. That's where we are right now. I guess my pitch, we're running up on time, is One thing I've been having a really tough time with this Kickstarter is that I feel like Facebook has gotten much better at throttling organic reach. And so it used to be that it was pretty easy for me to get word out there and people would like and share and comment and it would spread fast, and that is not happening as much this time around. I think the Facebook algorithm,
why do they want to, this is a bit of a digression,
but why do they want
ads?
They want you to pay for ad. That is very clear. They want you to pay for ads. So if you if you have a link out on if you include a link on a Facebook post, that deprioritizes the post. If you put a photo on a Facebook post, it prioritizes it. Like there's certain things that the algorithms do. And I suspect that mentioning Kickstarter deprioritizes, right? Like anything money related would be my guess. Because I'm like, why is this getting so much less engagement than all of these other posts? And so I got to try doing some without the word Kickstarter in it and see what happens. But,
this is like opaque, this little arms race of like how you can obliquely refer to your.
So one thing I would really love, you can put it in the comments, right? So it's just, but not in the original post.
Interesting.
Until
they figure that out.
At the moment, you can put it in the comments, And so, so right now, if people listening are in a position to be able to join the SLF as members, we have some nice deals.
Talk about that for a moment, but talk about for a minute about, like, we've talked about what it is. Why should someone, what are the range of reasons why they should come to the Kickstarter and click the button?
So we have some rewards for writers. They're not huge, I'll just be frank, but there are things like I think we have on there, like you can have a coaching session with me, for example. You can potentially become a guest on the podcast. So so check out the rewards. But I think actually
to be a guest on the podcast is probably, it just occurs to me now we're talking about that a more interesting thing would be like that you can nominate a guest on the podcast. You should maybe make it be or nominate, because I think probably a lot of people are like, I really want you to talk to my favorite writer more than they necessarily.
You can maybe add a tier for nominate. That would be a lower level tier that isn't as expensive too, right? You could, like add to our wish list, right? So that's interesting. Let's look at that, Darius. But I think mostly we are a nonprofit. We're a 501c3, and I think you do it because you believe in what we believe in. If you think Khan Academy is great, and if you think that, I looked at them, they are, at least so far, they're not doing really much in the way of lit. They have one little storytelling thing that I think they worked with Pixar to do, and but that's it so far. And so maybe they'll expand to that at some point, but I don't want to wait. So let's do it now. And so many people, I feel like storytelling is our birthright. Everyone gets to tell stories. Everyone should tell stories. It's important that we hear everybody's stories and not just the wealthy people's stories, or you know what I mean? Like, we need to hear that whole global conversation. And so we want to facilitate that. We want to make that easier. We want to lower the barriers. We want to help build that writing community. And I don't know. So I mean, this is all like, how do we make a better world? This is the first step. Talking about our experiences, figuring out how to do it better. I was reading something recently, I can't remember who said it, that science fiction is always about the present day, right? That, we're setting something 1,000 years in the future to talk about this thing that is bugging us right now. Right?
I have to say, I chafe. That's 100% true. Plus, I also kind of chafe at that truism, because there's a superficial read on that, which is just like, don't worry about the future stuff. It's all, just read it as a simple allegory. Sometimes I think that comment gets misread as saying, forget about the plausibility of this world. Just read it as a simple allegory. Like, what does this represent? Like a paint by numbers, 1-to-1 correspondence, which I think is a misreading of that. You can't help but be talking out of your own experience. The harder you try to rigorously think about the future, the more you are, of course, talking about whatever's bothering you now. But but there's a way to look at that reductively, I think, which is not, but anyway, that's
mostly, I agree. But I guess mostly if you are if you think creative writing and lit education should not be expensive and should be available to everyone across the world for free, that's why you should support our project.
And I also that idea of internationally connecting them. And I like the idea that, it's not that you are providing this instruction, but also if then these people are going to meet and connect and you're fostering.
I will say, like,
broader...
I'm a Sri Lankan diaspora writer. I went to Sri Lanka in 2019 and met 3 or 4 Sri Lankan science fiction fantasy writers, 2 of whom, Yudhanjaya Vijayaratne and Mandy Jayatissa, have books out that are terrific now. And it's been very enriching to my own writing. Having them in my community, being able to bounce ideas off of them, to ask, hey, I've been away for many decades at this point, close to 5 decades. Tell me if I'm getting something horribly wrong is incredibly helpful to me. But also just reading their work pushes my work further, right? So I don't know. I think I have big dreams. This is the thing, like, Ben, when I talk about this, it sounds so grandiose. I think I've been sort of a little reluctant to talk about it because I do start sounding like a megalomaniac, and usually I try to keep that. I don't think
you sound like a megalomaniac.
Down.
I don't think you sound like a megalomaniac. I think a megalomaniac. I think that there is a clear, I think this is exactly right in the sense that there are these very practical, immediate, you have a big context. You have a grand vision for why it's important, which is often important for getting things off the ground. Like if you're just like, I'd like it slightly better, like it's not super inspiring. If you're like, hey, one of the big problems in the world is the unequal playing field of who gets to tell stories. Like that's the big idea that sits inside of.
Oh, you phrased that really nicely, Darius. Write that
down. Well, that's what I heard you say. I'm just telling you back what you said.
Yeah.
And you have that big context to put it in, but then it doesn't stay fuzzy. I mean, this is also something I think that is very true of you, that like there's a big context, but it doesn't just stay on this fuzzy level of abstraction. You're like, and so we're going to post a video today where we talk to Darius, write this down. Like there's the ladder between the like, let's make a better world and the Darius, write this down, right? Like that's where the magic happens is that there are immediate concrete steps that live inside big context. So, I think that's
anyway, I almost forgot my pitch, which was if you can donate, that would be awesome. But also, if you're not in a position to donate, if you can share, comment, that's what we are in desperate need of right now, is just making the Kickstarter visible has been super challenging. So, and it worries me a little about the future of crowdfunding, because crowdfunding has been this incredible resource. And if we start, if the I'm going to sound like Cory Doctorow now, but like if the places that have monopolies on our communication channels start shutting down our abilities to do group interest projects that are for the public good, that's a real problem.
Well, and that is sort of how the monopolies work, and that is sort of the I feel very much like we've this is a not untypical thing that happens, that we're like, Google and Facebook and Twitter have been like really good at making things really slick and easy to use. And like, it was hard to do all your own hand-rolled blogging and laborious to go look and see if your friends were posting. All of a sudden it was super easy. We were just spoon-fed all of this delightfully smooth user interface, infinite scroll content. But once they got you. So you're then in a position where you've kind of sold your birthright. It's very easy for them to go, well, maybe you just only hear things where we got paid for ads now. I mean, not for nothing. There was like a decade where they were like, we don't need to make money. You know what I mean? Like there was a decade when all of these companies were running at a loss. Running on huge amounts of venture capital. Running at a not trying to make money, just trying to get to be the biggest. And that was all predicated on the idea that at some point they would then make the money because they had all the people inside their moat. Like that was, you could read their annual reports. They weren't hiding this. That was the game plan. So now that we're all in their moat, you don't have a lot of alternatives.
I'm honestly perfectly willing to pay Facebook $25 a month for what they give me, right? But they're going to make a lot more money by their model, right?
That was not the plan, right?
Yeah,
because they wouldn't have. Anybody who charged $25 a month wouldn't have grown a monopoly.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it had to be free for them to, have the vast billions of people inside of their
Yeah.
thing. And all the stuff Corey said. Go listen to the Corey episode.
Yes, I know.
Interoperability would help. We should.
Yes.
There's
Yes.
lots of
So-
legal things that should be.
There are ways to
law
fight
is
the
allowing
system.
them to-
Yes.
The law is allowing them to unequally stomp on people who are trying to do the same
Yeah.
thing they did when they were small. And Corey explains it
Right.
better in the episode. But anyway,
Yes. Okay.
so
So-
share, and also tell your WhatsApp group about it,
Yes.
because I think
You know.
I feel the emerging alternative to these big monsters. I'm finding I spend less time. I mean, I just
Yeah.
went and said a funny thing about Taylor Swift on Twitter because
Yeah.
the Red album,
Right.
Taylor's version, dropped yesterday, and I listened to it with my kids. But when I have a bon mot, I go. When I have clever things to say, I go show up on Twitter. But I do find that I'm a little burned out on the massive flow of social media, and I'm spending less and less time on those platforms. And I notice also that there was a moral panic about how the kids were spending all their times posting things in public and being exposed to one another and whatever.
Mhm.
But all the teens I know just hang out on WhatsApp with each other. Like they don't. Like maybe Instagram and TikTok a little, but like
They spend a lot
mostly
of
they go
time-
there to
Yes.
to admire or
Yeah.
what it is they're fans of people on TikTok or YouTube or whatever.
Right.
But like the teens I know are largely just talking to each other in smaller
Sure.
groups that aren't outside of, and that actually, I mean, of course, Zuckerberg does own WhatsApp, so it's not like that stuff is totally outside of the reach. Maybe it'll get monetized, but it is interesting that I feel like that's a little bit of a kind of a resistance.
We'll see.
not
Right.
not
Yeah.
this big. I mean, it's a constant flux, right?
Yeah.
Like the lords will forever be trying to enclose our lands. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? And we commoners will forever be running off to find the commons in whatever patch of woods is still available. And and sometimes that's in the rotting, abandoned wharf that was the Lord's last big investment project. So you know what I mean? It's a permanent interplay. Anyway,
All right.
that got philosophical.
We're
Go check out the
wrapping
Portland project. The Portland project. On
Go to
Kickstarter.
Kickstarter. Check out the Portland Project. I would happily talk about this forever, but I have to go and be on a panel in 20 minutes about the future of WisCon, which I
Oh,
also
yeah.
love. And speaking of conventions that I adore, WisCon is
Yes.
in Madison over Memorial Day weekend. I will be there. I hope to see some of you there because we can show each other our beautiful smiling faces again. And hopefully, I don't know.
I feel like that's this podcast's home con. We certainly talk about
Yeah.
WisCon the most of any con.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to that, and I got to eat some lunch before it, so we're gonna cut off.
All right.
But thank you all so much for listening, and I would love feedback on the Portland project, and I'm realizing we don't really even have a general feedback channel set up yet. So Darius,
also,
maybe
you
mention
can-
that to Summer as well. Yeah.
You can also go to the Portland site, but you can also give us feedback on the podcast's Twitter.
Do we have that set up? Oh, on Twitter.
Isn't there? There's a podcast Twitter.
Yes.
So-
Okay,
MR,
yes.
yeah, I could-
Definitely, you can talk back to us on Twitter. I feel like we should
Yes.
have an email set up, and I'm not sure we do for
We do.
I
listener
think we have an
feedback.
email set up, don't we?
We do?
yeah, I think it's
Tell us. We should tell people about it.
yeah, it's I usually put it at the end of the podcast in the outro,
Okay.
but it's at MRH podcast at speculatoliterature.org.
All right. So
It'll all be in the outro,
Yeah,
which is
so-
about to come in a minute
Yes.
because we're going to sign off.
All right. Excellent. Thank you,
Stay
everybody.
human
Yes.
or not.
Okay.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.